Merry Christmas. Wanted to be the first if at all possible. So, last week we looked at the verses leading up to the first part of Isaiah 9:6. And it's interesting that Isaiah begins by giving us a little insight into what would happen when the Messiah came. That he would begin not in Jerusalem, where he was expected to focus his efforts, but in the northern region known as Galilee of the Gentiles by the way of the sea. And we notice that by referencing the trade route known as the way of the sea, it was a reference to Jesus setting up his base of operations in Capernaum, which was on the north side of the sea and was a prominent city along that route. We also noted that, if you would, those walking in darkness was a reference to the Gentiles that dominated the region, and those living in the land of deep darkness were the Jews who chose to live in that Gentile region. Both were the first to have the light of truth shine upon them when Jesus began his ministry in Galilee, a region that had become a byword among the Jews to the south in Jerusalem and the surrounding region. So it was kind of like Isaiah was saying, always want to stick together. It's almost like Isaiah was saying the Messiah is going to start ministering in the region of Galilee, but first he has to be born. So let's pick up where we left off as Isaiah tells us more about this child that would be born in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given. And the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given. Interesting what Isaiah is saying there. As H. Melville writes in the Penny Pulpit, he says, if you would, we have here the great mystery of the Incarnation. Unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given. Unto us a child is born relates, we may safely say, to the humanity of Christ. To us a son is given relates to the divine nature of Christ. He was a son when born, even the eternal Son of God. He would be both God and man, the Father's gift to us. And the great mystery that has been a stumbling block for hundreds of millions, but is the hope of all those who believe. As we would read earlier in Isaiah chapter 7, he would be called, if you would, Emmanuel, God with us. And so we understand that concept that Christ came and he dwelt among his people, and now through his Holy Spirit he dwells with us and in us. But the next thing Isaiah tells us about the Messiah is, if you would, the government will be on his shoulders. Now, I have read and heard a couple of different views concerning this statement. And the first view is that, if you would, it is referring to the fact that the Jewish rulers stood against him and would turn him over to the Romans and demand his execution. And that the government would be opposing him. And so the view is that it is referring to the tension between Jesus and the Jewish rulers that would ultimately lead to his crucifixion. And while this is true, that those tensions did lead the Jewish rulers to hating him and having him executed, it doesn't fit with the rest of the prophecy. Okay? The rest of the prophecy talks about his greatness and who he is. Therefore, keeping that in mind, I have to agree with the second view, and that is, if you would, it is referring to the fact that Jesus is king. See, kings have the government resting on their shoulders, in that they are the ones who serve as the head administrators of the government of their kingdoms. They're the ones who are in charge. They're the ones, as the old saying goes, this is where the buck stops. Okay? And so it is that the government rests on their shoulders. And so, if you would, it is the king or queen who is ultimately responsible for the well-being of their kingdom and their subjects. And when we understand that, we begin to understand the concept of the government resting upon their shoulders. They have the weight of their people, of their kingdom. It all rests on them. But of course, the Jews believed that he would come and be king over Israel. We understand that. But what they didn't understand was that he was going to set up a spiritual kingdom and not an earthly kingdom. That is one of the things that was a stumbling block for them all of the way through his ministry. And one of the reasons they were refusing to accept him as a Messiah, because he was not setting up an earthly kingdom. He was not putting together a force that was going to take on the Romans, to throw off the oppressors, and make Israel predominant in the world. That wasn't what they were looking for. They were looking for a physical ruler. But as Jesus told Pilate, my kingdom's not of this world. If it were, my subject would take up arms. And we'll discuss that a little bit later. But then Isaiah says, if you would, he will be called Wonderful Counselor. This is found translated two ways, and we will consider both because both carry a valid meaning. One is the way it is written here, that he will be called, if you would, the Wonderful Counselor. The other way reads that he will be called, if you would, Wonderful Counselor, separated. And a comma can make a lot of difference in how a passage reads. Now, sadly, the original texts do not have modern punctuation. So we must try to discern the appropriate punctuation from how the passage reads. And in this case, either one could be valid in this passage. So let's look at the second one first as we take a glance into this particular verse. So the first one would be, if you would, he will be called Wonderful. Having that description stand alone carries with it the idea that he will be wonderful in every way and everything that he does. He will be a wonderful ruler who always looks out for his subjects and only wants the best for them. He will be a wonderful friend, a wonderful, just you name it, wonderful would apply to it. His kingdom would be a kingdom that welcomes all who would come to him, who desire a ruler that loves them and will care for them. A king who would be, as King David described him, if you would, a shepherd, and his people would be his flock. So he would be a wonderful shepherd. You might call him a shepherd king. And that shepherd king would provide for the well-being of his flock by making sure they have everything they need. And also by watching over his flock as a guardian to guide and lead and protect them. A shepherd king who cares for his flock so lovingly and thoroughly that his flock are no longer restless but feel safe and secure. A shepherd king who loves his flock so much that he would die for them. And did. The Messiah would be that wonderful shepherd king. He would also amaze and leave people in wonder at the things he does. Heal the sick. Make the lame walk, the mute speak, the deaf hear, the blind see, feed multitudes, walk on water, calm the sea, curse a fig tree, teach with authority like no one else, know the Scriptures better than the teachers of the law and the scribes and the Jewish leaders. He cast out demons, raised the dead, come back to life himself after being crucified. Yes, he would leave people in awe and wonder at the amazing things he would do. Everywhere he would go, he would be considered to be wonderful. It's no wonder that the crowds followed him and wanted to be near him because he was wonderful. I mean, we've got all these celebrities today. I mean, you name it. We got celebrities. They're Hollywood celebrities. They're sports celebrities. They're celebrities for this. They're celebrities for that. But none of them compare the Messiah and his wonderfulness. And it's such a shame that we are caught up in a world where everybody wants to follow after all of these earthly celebrities rather than following after the one who truly is wonderful. I mean, think about it. All these young girls going goo eyes over all the TV guys and the actors. Some of you may have done that when you were younger too. I don't know. They maybe had that favorite singer and just, oh, if I could just meet him. Some of them even write in their diaries what it'd be like to be married to him. Yeah. I'm sure guys had their crushes too. But yet, we see Jesus, who's followed by tens of thousands. They don't just show up once for a concert. They're following him all around the region. As he travels around the Sea of Galilee, they are there. They don't want to go home because he's wonderful. Now, twice he has to feed them because they don't want to leave. It's like we've talked about many times before, when you look at those numbers in the Scriptures, you find that they only list the men. That's not counting the women and children. Feeding the 5,000? Yeah. How about 15 to 20,000? Feeding the 4,000? How about 12 to 18,000? And probably more in both cases. Celebrity? Yeah, in many ways. I'm sure he was followed like a celebrity would be, just like it happens today, because we know that as his ministry went on, slowly the crowds disappeared. But that never diminished how wonderful he was and is. Everything he did was for good, was for righteousness, was for justice, was to be pleasing to God and provide a way for us to come to the Father. So yeah, he would leave people in awe and wonder at the amazing things he would do. And as John says in his gospel, he says, Jesus did even more than what's been written down. And if we were to try to write down everything that Jesus did, John says there wouldn't be enough ink and paper to write everything down. Wonderful? Oh, he gave wonderful its definition. But then as we also look into this, we find he is also, if you would, counselor. Now, a counselor is not only one who guides, but also one who carries out plans, or the counsel he has made, or the plans or counsel of another that has been made. So, counselor. As we look through the passages of Scripture, we find that no one can teach him. He's God. Okay? There's nobody that can come up to him and say, well, you need to learn a few things. Okay? I like what Mark Lowry talks about, being in school and he was hyperactive and always in trouble and everything. And he says, could you imagine being in school with Jesus? You're in trouble. Teacher's got you and says, you should be more like your brother, Jesus. He got A in biology. No kidding. He wrote the book. So no one can teach him. He's God. He already knows. He already understands. And not only that, he knows the will of the Father, and he counsels us concerning that will. He's been in the presence of God. He knows what the Father wants from us. And he understands that we struggle with that. And he counsels us, and through his life, he tried to show us how to live so that we can be pleasing to God. And as counselor, he also carries out God's plan or counsel for our redemption and our well-being. So as our counselor, he went to the cross. He fulfilled the plan. The plan that was ordained for us before the beginning of time, for our benefit. He gives divine guidance to all who seek Him. As James wrote in the 1st chapter, 5th verse, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. Wow. Want wisdom? Just ask for it. Ask the counselor. Ask the advocate. Ask God. He will gladly give us wisdom. It's there for the taking. All we have to do is ask for it. You know what happens too often? We ask for it, God gives it, and we don't use it. Give me wisdom! Well, I'm still going to do my thing. No. Let's face it, we're like that. You know, we even see it in our kids. You impart wisdom to them, and then it comes along a little bit later, and they kind of done something else that kind of fits in the same framework, and you ask them, why did you do that? I don't know. We also read in Proverbs chapter 2, the first 6 verses. My son, if you accept my words and store up my commands within you, turning your ear to wisdom and applying your heart to understanding. Indeed, if you call out for insight and cry aloud for understanding, and if you look for it as for silver and search for it as for hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom, from His mouth come knowledge and understanding. And so is our counselor. He's there to give us wisdom and guidance. His counsel is always for our well-being, and it is never deceptive. Oh, that's a big plus there. I mean, we live in a society today that it seems like deception is, how shall I put it? Something to be proud of. Let's face it. It's reached the point to where you just about can't believe anything that you've been told, regardless of who it's coming from. Because basically society has become a master of deception. But our counselor, his counsel knows no deception. What he tells us is the truth. Nothing less. We can always go to him for help and guidance, because he will always guide us in the right path. And as our counselor, if you would, he is also our mediator. In carrying out the plans that were ordained for us from the beginning of time, as our counselor, he mediated a new covenant between us and God. And this was accomplished by his work on the cross. Then we have the first reading of the passage, if you would, Wonderful Counselor. This would focus primarily on his role as counselor, not everything else, like we've been looking at, but focus primarily on his role of counselor. As a wonderful counselor, the coming son of David will carry out a royal plan that will cause the world to marvel. And the culmination of his plan on earth was, if you would, when he was crucified and rose on the third day. The wonderful counselor who came, carried out the plan, gave his life, rose on the third day so that we could have eternal life with him, so that we could be redeemed, so that we could be forgiven, so that we could be adopted into the family of God. The fulfillment of this prophecy is spelled out more completely in Isaiah 11 and Isaiah 11:24 through 27 and the well-known chapter 53. The summary can be found in Isaiah 25:1, if you would. Lord, you are my God. I will exalt you and praise your name, for in perfect faithfulness you have done wonderful things, things planned long ago. The plan was wonderful. The counselor who carries it out is wonderful. I think sometimes we have a tendency to use that word wonderful and not really give it the full emphasis of what it means. You know, we kind of knock it down a level because we have a tendency to apply it to so many things. But when we see its use here applied to the work of God, the work of Christ, and who Christ is, we begin to understand just how important that word is, and we begin to understand the magnitude of what it means. So much of what we apply wonderful to today sells it short of its true meaning. Because the idea behind wonderful is that there's nothing beyond it. There's nothing greater. This is the greatest thing that could possibly be. It's wonderful. And that's our Savior. That's the child who was born in a stable, who lived his life to show us how to live a life pleasing to God, and then gave his life for us. That's wonderful. Things planned long ago, before the foundations of the earth were ever laid, God had a wonderful plan for us. A plan that there could be no better possible plan. It's wonderful. The Apostle Paul writes about the marveling of the world at this plan in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, where we read, "For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, the intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate." Where is the wise person? Where is the teacher of the law? Where is the philosopher of this age? Has not God made the wisdom of the world, made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not know him, God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to save those who believe. Jews demand signs and Greeks look for wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. What's the Apostle Paul saying? They marvel and think it's foolishness. They marvel that people would believe in such a thing. It's just too wonderful to be true. It's beyond their comprehension. But to those who do believe, the Apostle Paul says, if you would, it is the power of God. Wonderful, wonderful counselor. A plan so wonderful that the world who doesn't believe just kind of shakes their head in disbelief because it's too beyond possible. It's just too much. Too good to be true. This wonderful counselor, the God-man, God with us, would work his wonderful plan. As the Apostle Paul writes in Galatians 4, "But when the set time had fully come, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law, that we might receive adoption to sonship." When the set time had fully come, the Messiah would enter the world as a baby. God, wrapped in flesh and blood. So amazing. So incredible. So wonderful. And he would fulfill the plan that was set into motion before the universe was even spoken into existence. He would come unnoticed by the religious elite and be born in the tiny town of Bethlehem. Then, 33 years later, he would complete that wonderful plan as foretold in Isaiah 53, if you would. Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. Yet who of his generation protested? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life an offering for sin, he will see his offspring and prolong his days. And the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. After he has suffered, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. By his knowledge, my righteous servant will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities. Therefore I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life unto death, and was numbered with the transgressors. For he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. What a wonderful counselor indeed. God with us. The King who cares for his people like a shepherd cares for his flock. He carries the weight of his government on his shoulders with love and compassion, and with justice and righteousness. The King, born in a humble stable, who grows up and gives his life for us so that we can have life with him. If you would, he became a son of man so that we could become children of God. Wonderful? Oh, yes. Very wonderful. You would. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor. To us, a child is born. To us, a son is given. And the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. When was the last time you considered how wonderful he truly is? When is the last time you looked through the Scriptures and marveled and were amazed at the things he has done? When's the last time you took a good look at the things that have happened in your life and the way he has carried you through and looked at them in awe and wonder and considered how wonderful he truly is? So wonderful that he was willing to accept you as you are. Or maybe I should say in spite of how you were. And loved you enough to not leave you that way. To begin a transformation process. This wonderful counselor, this shepherd king. Do you have decisions you need to make today? Changes you might need to make in your life?